Good morning. So we are waiting for Mr. Huan to join us, but the integration of PayNow and UPI has opened up huge opportunities for business between India and Singapore. And this is definitely going to be a big game changer for all of us. And I'm sure this will open a new era of business possibilities. And this was launched by RBI governor, and the importance of this event can be understood by the fact that both the prime ministers of both the countries, Mr. Modi as well as Mr. Lee from Singapore, they were present, and this is a very recent development. It was done on 22nd February 23. So definitely this is going to be opening up faster, efficient, and more transparent cross-border transactions. And also we will have huge boost to the trade between Singapore and India, and also the travel and remittances between the two countries will definitely improve. And we are going to have lots of things happening between India and Singapore. So Huan is here. Hi, Huan. Welcome to Startup Change Leaders weekly event.
Yes,
so,
hi.
Hi, how are you? So first
Very
of
well,
all,
thank you. Very well. Thanks
Yeah.
for having me. Thanks for having me.
Yes. So first of all, Huan has to travel, but he is taking up this call sitting at the airport. So first of all, thank you for doing that. And Huan, I already set the context and I told them about this very unique thing which has happened on 22nd February. So we would like to hear you how it's going to impact the trade between India and Singapore. What possibilities it's opening up, and how are we going to benefit from it, both the countries?
Excellent. So if you can hear me properly,
Yeah.
Excellent. So nice to meet you all. Good to see some familiar faces. As you know, for the first timers who might have not met me, Rajiv may have told you that I specialize in creating holding companies here in Singapore. Whether it's virtual businesses or virtual holding companies or virtual sales offices or single family offices, I utilize Singapore's efficiencies to create, all these kinds of structures. Of course, for only one, main purpose is to basically retain more wealth, for anybody in the world. Yeah. Now, recent news about this integration between PayNow and UPI, which is big for us. The reason why, of course, India is one of the top 5 trading partners for Singapore, and also, India is scheduled to really be the Asia dragon for the next few years moving forward, as we expect a lot of economic growth, from your country. So, you have the most number of population these days, so I expect a lot of really good, similar China-like things to come from India, right? Over the next X number of years.
Yeah, sure.
So, so now, with this kind of potential, this linking of the payment gateway, between these two countries, with, of course, the main thing, the immediate benefit is to facilitate fund transfer, between Singapore and India, right? That is straightforward. Now, the way that fund transfer is happening in Singapore right now, there's using this payment gateway like PayNow. We are all using PayNow, whether it is for the business or whether it is for personal fund transfer. So currently we are able to transfer funds using this system, between business to business or business to people, using just a matter of things like your mobile number, using just a matter of this inputs like your company registration number, using just a matter of very simple things. So these are the two main, and also the identity number, right? So we're able to transfer funds using these kinds of inputs these days. So this means that the bank account here that we open, whether it is personal or business, would have this feature that allows you to be able to transfer funds business to business or business to people or vice versa, right? The funds that we transfer using the system is immediate, real time, never faster. We have a lot of payment systems in Singapore. We have the real gross time settlement system. We have also what we call the FAST, the fast system, and of course we have SWIFT, right? So in this kind of context, the pay now tops them all because the fund received is immediate, real time, So when that happens, and with this integration happens with India, I expect the same to happen, right? So between business to business and business to people, because we are already on the the same thing is also for India, whereby this payment system is also able to do the same as what we are doing right now in Singapore, business to business and business to people. Correct me if I'm wrong, Rajiv, right?
Yeah. Perfect.
So if this is the kind of situation that is already happening in India and vice versa in Singapore, then what we are going to be happening and seeing in the next few years moving forward is the ability to then transfer vice versa in real time between business to business, business to people, in the same sort of user experience as what we are already experiencing now, in Singapore using PayNow. So that is extremely beneficial for all parties, right? So if that happens, then that brings about all the other benefits that we can get from this kind of situation, right? This means that if the efficiency fund transfer really will happen, this means that Indian nationals would then be able to capture a lot more wealth using the tax laws and the corporate laws that Singapore has, right? Now, even though, of course, India is a developed nation these days, there are a lot of more efficiency laws, there are a lot of tax advantages to create businesses in India, which I understand there will be, and there already is. On the main general sense, Singapore is still more tax efficient, than India. So this means that if fund comes in, into India, let's talk about into Singapore first, right? Because you already have your account set up here, right? You'll then be able to seamlessly transfer back to India. Now, a quick share screen example. Rajiv, if you allow me to share screen, I will show you.
Yeah, please. Okay, just 1 minute. Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Right. So this is an example of a business account. And in these days, and I guess in India it will be similar. We have a lot of virtual accounts, that we create. This is one of them, which is called Aspire. It's a Singapore brand, right? They provide, virtual business accounts in the same manner as what bank accounts do, if not better, because their rates are better, right? So basically, the services that you will get under this kind of providers are basically the same, if not better, than the traditional banks. And they are faster because you can only need about a few days to create this kind of accounts, and they ask lesser questions than the traditional banks. Right? So we've created tons and tons of these accounts for our clients. Now with this kind of integration, you'll then be able to receive money via PayNow because there is already an integration to receive money via PayNow. Right? If you receive money via PayNow, right, from Singapore, right, you'll then be able to because with this integration, send it over back to India. Now, I expect the same thing to also happen to receive money in India. I expect that to happen as well because there's this integration. So what will happen is that when you request PayNow, you'll then be able to see, instead of asking you, getting people to send via PPA or getting people to send via QR code, all that is all available now. No difference, right? So it's just a matter of who the account holder is. So people from India and Singapore will then be able to scan, be able to send, directly using these kinds of method, and the money will then be directed into the account holder. In this case, the Singapore business entity.
Yeah.
Real time, right? So that is absolutely amazing. First, right? Now, the money transfer will come in when you're about to, because this pay now is then linked to the wallet. The wallet here in this case is a Singapore dollar wallet. There it is. No, Singapore dollar wallet at this moment in time, the business account. I just created this like this week, so there's no money in there. But so this wallet is there available because PayNow needs this wallet. You cannot have PayNow without this wallet. It's just together, right? Because PayNow is denominated in Singapore dollars. Right? So when you have PayNow denominated in Singapore dollars, you receive the balance here in this account. From there, when you start to transfer the money using the same system, you will then be able to see that instead of only no choice between Singapore dollars only, you're able to see that you can have a choice with Indian rupees because of this integration. And because you're allowed now to be able to change the currency into Indian rupees, you'll then be able to enter that information that belongs to the Indian entity, such as the Indian business number, Indian phone number, Indian mobile number, and all this kind of thing, right? Because it's denominated in Indian rupees, right?
Yeah.
So that process then becomes very seamless. It's going to be no difference to how we transfer money between PayNow and PayNow. Now there's no difference between how we transfer money between PayNow and UPI. All they do is to create another input, pretty much a drop down that allows you to choose the currency. If it's Singapore dollar, automatically you transfer to a Singaporean or Singapore entity. If it's rupees, you automatically decide that you're going to be transferring to an Indian business or Indian entity, Indian person. That is how outstanding this kind of situation is going to be. Right? So there is no worry about which provider I'm going to be using, exchange rates, and all that kind of situation. Because when we are able to do this kind of integration, to do this kind of transfer, they will not be charging you 5, 10, 15% on top of what the banks are already charging in India. Because that is typically what is happening these days. When you receive Singapore dollars in India, you do not receive actual Singapore dollars, you convert to rupees. The banks are not going to be shy in this situation. Here, it is not the case. Here, if you do that, you will then be able to receive directly in Indian rupees. And then the central bank between Singapore and India, and between Singapore and India will do their own swap, and they will swap it according to the spot rates. So this means that you will always be getting the actual XE.com type of rates, no margin in this kind of system. I don't even need to ask them what the conversion rates are because it is clear that it is going to be, very, very affordable. Right. So this means that there is a big savings if you use these kinds of transfer system, And there is also, because now it is real time, you control your own currency exposure. Right? You are able to keep money in both sides. You keep control of Singapore dollar exposure. You control your own Indian rupee exposure. Indian rupee exposure is, Indian rupee is more volatile and will unfortunately still be, more volatile. So you control the exposure yourself. Right?
Yeah.
That is how outstanding it's going to be. Now, the question will then come, actually, what are we saving? The savings are huge, right? So let me quickly show you another screen. This is a simple tax comparison, right, between Singapore and India and a few other countries, right? Here in Singapore, we have at the beginning, we're talking about business, right? Because in Singapore, and the reason why it's only related to business is because you can only, or most of the Indian nationals here will only be able to open accounts, under the business account here in Singapore. You are unlikely to open a personal account. And the only reason why you could be able to open a personal account in Singapore is that you're not living in India, because there is non-residency Indian status, right? NI, right? So most of us here sitting in this room would then only be able to open business accounts because I'm still residing back in India. I cannot open personal account here in Singapore. It's just this, So if you only so now we're only going to be comparing the tax comparison between business to business, from an apples to apples context. If a yearly taxable profit that somebody is earning in India equals to, for example, 100,000 Singapore dollars equivalent, and you can convert that to lakhs, achieve, quickly, right? In Singapore, for the first 3-4 years, because we have a tax holiday, right, we are only going to be considering 25,000 of this 100,000 because there's a tax holiday. And based on this 25,000, you'll be taxed at the headline rate, which is 17%. Right. Now, note that this taxable profit is whatever is left remaining after you pay off all your expenses. And in Singapore, we have all of them. All the expenses are considered expenses. Most of them, if not. Salaries, advertising, food, transport, entertainment, all this kind of thing, right? Consulting fees, everything. My fees, everything, right? Your fees, everybody, so would be considered as a deductible. So after you finish, the business finish paying all that, right? You will likely have a net profit. Otherwise, why are we doing business for? You have a net profit, and this is the net profit. Net profit, before tax is what you can call it. So you can call it the earnings before interest tax, depreciation and amortization. Let's call it interest before earnings before interest and tax, right? So this is the amount of which is the EBIT. You're only going to consider a percentage of this 100,000 in Singapore because we have a tax holiday, and this in Singapore now we have 17%. So this means that there's an actual effective rate you get reduced to about 5%, because of this tax holiday. Now, in India, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, at the moment, it is about almost, above a little bit over 30%. You usually consider the whole thing, right? Actually, right? So if you consider the whole thing, then you have a effective tax rate, which is whatever that tax rate is going to be, 30%, right? And then, so this when we can start calculating tax savings now, if you actually do this. Tax saving in this context, equivalent to almost 30,000 Singapore dollars. Huge, right? Just by doing this, right? Just by doing this. Right? So this means that I create structures a lot because there's huge tax savings here in this situation. In Singapore, we're all about effective tax rate, right? Because the tax holiday can continue, right? It can be extended, it can continue. We'll always have this tax holiday because our fiscal policy is different from the Indian fiscal policy. We do not rely extensively on corporate taxes. We have a lot of other fiscal policies that would help us, the central bank, continue to top up their coffers, right? Including currency swaps, including investing in other countries, including investing in foreign currencies. That is how our fiscal department works. We do not rely extensively on the corporate tax rate. So we are always able to have an effective tax rate that is going to be very low, right? So if you compare this context, you'll then be able to see that there will always be a tax saving in this very quick example, right? There will be the time whereby in this next year or two even already, there is a situation which is called a minimum corporate tax rate. They are going to be setting the minimum corporate tax rate at about 15%, right? And you will see that in the news. However, that minimum corporate tax rate is only applicable to actual subsidies. This means that your Singapore entity is 100% owning the Indian entity. And if your Singapore entity is 100% owning the Indian entity, and then you subject to an effective tax rate of, say, for example, 5%, and then Indian entity has 0, they will have this minimum corporate tax rate of 15% incurred, right? That will occur. However, in most of our cases, in not all of our cases, these are separate entities.
Yeah.
The Indian entity is not owned by the Singapore company in all of our cases.
Yeah.
Why we do that? Because we really want you to have that contractor and subcontractor relationship. We want you to have that, vendor and customer relationship, even though you may own the both, companies, right? To be able to take advantage of this kind of situation. And it's extremely legal because Singapore, we recognize permanent establishment. And I think I told you before during the last time, what exactly is a permanent establishment? Right?
Yeah.
Permanent establishment is whereby an entity that you create in Singapore, you are making strategic decisions go-to-market decisions, management decisions, these kinds of important board-level decisions. You're doing that here in Singapore. You're not using Singapore entity as a pass-through. You're not using Singapore entity as a storage. You're not using Singapore entity as any of this. If there's any contracts that you're drawing up, it will stay the Singapore company name and address on there. That is an actual management decision situation. And you can do that virtually wherever you're living, right? And we, in our role, we only do this. We only recognize companies in our portfolio as permanent establishment. Only. Because we understand these kinds of situations, right? So now that you are able to have a permanent establishment in Singapore, you'll then be able to issue contracts and make decisions, etc., to the benefit or be supported by somebody like us or anybody in our team who's also going to be a resident director of the company. Right now, you will see when you create businesses in Singapore, there are resident directors and nominee directors and local directors and all these kind of terms that comes up. Do not get confused. In Singapore, there is only one term called a resident director. There is no other term. Any other term that you see, nominee directors and all that kind of thing, they are made up. Made up. They are not recognized. They are made up. Made up by people who want to secure more deals, etc. And it's been made up for 10, 20 years, unfortunately. But that is how it is, right? So we only have resident director capacity, and this resident director capacity is there to support these kinds of decision making. Go-to-market strategies, corporate, all the kind of things that you do, Rajiv, So that is something that we can do together, support the company in India using a Singapore holding company, has as many board meetings as we can to discuss strategic decisions, and then go about trying to collect revenues outside of India using the Singapore route.
That's very important. Yeah.
Extremely important. Extremely important. Right. So now that you understand the tax efficiencies from a corporate standpoint, there's also other tax efficiencies that you really enjoy. In Singapore, we have things like additional deductions on R&D spending. Right? The past budget that we had last month, we raised that R&D spending tax deduction from 250% to 400%. Again, that is huge. What does that mean? This means that if you legitimately spend that money in Singapore, R&D purposes also means registration of trademark, registration of patent, supporting your other development work, trying out new things,
Right.
You are able to then be able to have a deduction on your, this taxable profit of 400%. So whatever you're making, for example, before this R&D spending, if it's this 100,000 before R&D spending, right, that you have made, and your R&D spending is say 50,000, 50,000 times 200,000, you're making a net loss. That is what is happening, So which is good, which really is good, So this means that there's every opportunity for people around the world, really. And you are talking about I'm not kidding about this. We have a lot of MNCs here that treat Singapore only as an R&D center. When you come into Singapore, on your visits and all that, you'll see a lot of innovation centers scattered around the country, suburb, and these innovation centers are big. They're not of one office here and there. They are a whole estate. Right? You'll see that Hyundai is setting one up, Google is setting one up, and all that kind of thing. Right? And this will create jobs, So Singapore wants to do this. We understand the power of innovation. We don't have anything else except this. Right? We have a lot of MNCs that could use Singapore as an R&D, even though the actual work itself may or may not be legal here in Singapore. For example, Philip Morris, they do their R&D for e-cigarettes here in Singapore. No kidding. And in Singapore, we are illegal to sell e-cigarettes. It is not legal to smoke e-cigarettes. Vapes, e-cigarettes is not legal. But here, they use Singapore as an R&D to develop their latest e-cigarettes. That is how ridiculous the situation is.
And government allows that, is it?
Not only allow that, we give them R&D tax deduction.
Okay.
Yeah. So there you go. The government here not only allows that, we want them to be here. They will speak to EDB. They will get R&D grants for this. I did a grant talk last month. they are EDB, the Singapore government here, actively searches for these kinds of companies to provide them grants on top of this tax deduction.
Oh, great.
And when you do grants, in Singapore, we have a lot of grants. People, when you do grants, you apply them and then you wait 3-6 months to get back. Here, the government goes to them to offer them the grant. We apply, but they are received. That is a totally different context.
Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah. So that is how ridiculous the situation is, right? So now that you have this excellent advantage of spending money here in Singapore, use it, because a lot of things are considered deductibles.
Right.
Your food, your transport, your allowances, your entertainment, your office back in India, for example, all of them are considered deductible. So all you do now is to be able to open an account that looks like the one just now I showed you, whereby they will issue you a card, and then the card will be denominated, for example, in Singapore dollars or US dollars, most of the time Singapore dollars. And you then be able to spend that card on things. Because nowadays we take a lot of credit card payments, especially in India also, the same thing. You will spend the card. But in this case, it's denominated in Singapore dollars. Because of the exchange rate, they are going to be very friendly with this kind of conversion rates. Use it. You save money spending these things in India. Right? Even though it is denominated in Singapore dollars in card, because of this conversion rate, you actually save money. Right? So that is how, again, unbelievable that situation is. If I'm an Indian national and I understand all this, I will not have, maybe my own personal account and my business account, but all my spending I'll be doing from Singapore as much as I can. That is what I'll do, because I understand. Right?
Yeah, fantastic opportunities opening up, and I'm sure it will going to increase the trade between India and Singapore, and having a Singapore entity becomes much more relevant after coming of this. Yeah.
And if anybody here has exposure to crypto investments, digital assets, because that is still not very legal, in India, in Singapore, it's extremely efficient. In Singapore, we open holding companies to hold crypto assets only. They have all the accounts, similar to Binance, Crypto.com, or whoever it is, right? But in this case, they are regulated here in Singapore. License regulated, they are operating legally. You open the account under the business name with them. You start to recognize your own private wallet with this kind of accounts that you already have. Deposit whatever tokens you want in there. If you are receiving for revenues using digital assets or tokens from anybody else, do the same thing. All right, receive it in these kinds of accounts. From there, you can then keep them or convert them into fiat like USD, and then send the USD directly into that account that I showed you just now. All that extremely efficient. Transaction fees are the lowest, right? Very fast, no argument. Because right now, what is happening, if you're going to be doing that same cycle in India, you're going to go to the peer-to-peer route.
Right.
It's an OTC route, over the counter. This means that you got to negotiate with somebody. None of this situation. When you start negotiating something, there's no end. Right? Here in Singapore, it is what it is. Right? The token is this dollar, it is what it is. Right? USD is this way, it is what it is. Right?
Yeah.
So there is no argument. Receive it in US dollars, convert it to Singapore dollars, and then send it directly, in rupees, or put it in your card, start spending or start paying some employees, all everything through these kinds of accounts. So we combine 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 accounts together. That is exactly what happens. One to receive USDC, one to receive the actual USD, one to receive the money that you're going to spend because the card facilities are better. One to another payment gateway to receive credit card subscriptions from your customers. 4 or 5 accounts. And because even though there is still 4 or 5 accounts, the transaction fees are still extremely low in this kind of situation because it is an integration. Right? That company that I showed you just now, Aspire, would integrate with Wise. If you need to send money in rupees, go ahead. They will do the integration. If you just click send money into rupees, they will ask you whether you have a Wise account. If not, they will also have that capability for you to transfer in rupees. They will use the Wise integration to do that. And when you do this, the conversion rates again are very, very attractive.
Right.
No question now, Rajiv, with sending money in and out. So if you actually can send money in and out, you're able to collect from around the world without any restriction, and you're saving so much money doing so, then it becomes a real no-brainer. When you're saving money doing so, you will then have all the other liquidity options that will be open to you. That liquidity option that I told you about with the crypto situation, whereby now you can liquidate USD, liquidate Bitcoin, liquidate this kind of thing directly into USDC very efficiently. That is a liquidation process, right? There are other liquidation process, whereby now if you are going to be selling shares, right, in your company, you need more working capital, right? Do so, because in India there are a lot of other these tax considerations that you have to consider when you start selling your shares in your Indian company.
Yeah.
The first thing that you speak to is your accountant. Here, the first thing that they speak to in this kind of action is me, because I'm the one telling them that I will be issuing shares. I'll be making sure your shares are being transferred to the right people because you're receiving money for it. There is no question of tax.
Right.
No question of tax in this situation because we do not have this tax to consider, right?
That's fantastic. That's great.
So now there's a huge liquidation process. Now, if you're able to do this, it not just only benefits you, but it also benefits your investee, the investor.
Yeah.
Because if you have no tax, they have no tax, right? So they won't have the tax exposure if they are holding shares in this company of yours, unless they are subjected to very strong common reporting systems, like the ones in Canada, like the ones in the US, like the ones in these kinds of situations. In India, the common reporting systems or the common reporting, this requirement is lesser.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It is lesser for a good reason, Bajaj. It is lesser because you need to grow your economy. We understand that we have to, grow our economy, our own economy. We have to invest. We have to, have the FDI. We have to also invest in other companies. There is lesser, of this kind of common reporting, in India. There is a reporting required if you liquidate back into India. That is clear.
Yeah.
So when you sell your shares and you make a capital gain, you keep the money here in Singapore, right? Because there's lesser common reporting requirements, you will not necessarily need to disclose it. But if you send the money back to India, then for sure you have to, where's this money coming from? What shares have you sold? Etc. You will be subjected to that, right? So now it becomes a real heaven to be able to just do investments through India, not just through startup companies, but also stocks and shares, crypto tokens, digital assets, anything, right? Because of this situation, right?
Right.
The concept is still applied, right? So
That's
that is
great.
and then when you're talking about selling your company, because you have this kind of efficiencies, your market now become expense. Instead of just working with nationals in India, you're now working with nationals in Singapore, for example, right? You're now working with nationals in country A, country B, country C. They all recognize that Singapore is this kind of image.
Yep.
Right? Your market immediately expands, right?
Yep.
So you can start talking to people, right? Because for them it's easy to send money in, right?
Great.
So yeah, so that is a liquidation thing as well that I want to talk to you about. Also, when it comes to listing companies, I think I covered that in the previous this chat.
Yeah.
In Singapore, you can list your company anywhere in the world. No kidding.
Yeah.
Because we are still subjected to the common English law, it is a very straightforward law that 70, 80 countries here in the world recognize. Most of the developed nations,
right,
including the States, they understand this. So you're able to now list your company in a country like Canada, for example. Simple RTO, because it's still a share agreement, right? We're talking about private limited companies only, not all the others, right? So this means that you can do a reverse, engineering. You have a project, for example, in Brazil, and this is a real case. Project, in Brazil, you understand that you're going to liquidate this company in Australia or Canada. You don't know yet, but you know that you'll eventually do that. you start collecting investors into this company in Singapore based on this project in Brazil that you have, which is potentially going to generate a lot of money, right? So there's no need to realize the project. You just need to make sure that you own the project or the company owns the project, and then start speaking to investors A, B, C, D, E, get them to deposit their funds into the company, don't spend it, right? Keep the funds into the holding company in Singapore, and then go to Canada, go to Australia, go to wherever you want to go. And then start to do that reverse takeover. Because they will recognize that you have 500,000 sitting in your Singapore holding account. They are more keen than you to take access to this one. Because you already have funds in there. They are more keen than you to do so. Right? So this means that there's no end of people that you'll be able to start, negotiating with. Your bargaining power, instead of going below that, now it's elevated because you have done it reversely. Right? Even if nobody is going to take you, you do it yourself. You public list yourself. No problem. Right? So you can do that. A lot of specs around these days. Singapore has tons of specs, all this kind of thing. You can do that. Start speaking to people about it.
That's great. That's
great.
Wow.
So that liquidation opportunity that I see is really evident in the Singapore context. Of course, India will have similar as well. I see a lot of good companies in India, going to Nasdaq, going to this kind of places. But from the Singapore side of it, it is a lot more efficient. It is a lot more beneficial for the investor to do it because they've got lesser tax exposure. The laws are very similar. The cost is very, efficient. The cost sometimes could be, you could argue that the cost may or may not be higher. However, there's a likely chance, there's a more higher chance of it succeeding because the market opportunities are more. Right. That's very good. That is how I see it, Rajiv. Right. So I guess I said I'm gonna have to. Yeah, I didn't realize I got it. So go ahead. If anybody questions,
can we have some questions?
Please.
So Aditya, you have any question on this? Aditya?
Yes, sir. I think that there are some interesting, developments, both from the UPI payment part. It's also interesting to know how does India view the money coming back into India. I understand that paying out is easy with you as a tourist or as a business. Now it's not a part of LRS, so whatever expense you do doesn't need to be declared separately as LRS because it'll just be an expense. But interesting to know how India views bringing the money back into India.
That's precisely why they do this, Rita. They want money to come back into India. That is precisely why they do this.
So in that case, Juan, I think his question is, how about the tax, structuring and efficiency in that case? Yeah.
You control it. You can have as much exposure or as little exposure as you like. Right? You can control it. Because you control your spending now. You can decide how much exposure you like.
Yeah, it's definitely not just strategic value, tactical value. Like you said, there are savings, and there's the whole concept of the R&D, where 4 times of that could be a tax holiday. So it's really, really compelling from the case of an entrepreneur's standpoint. So it's interesting, even though and also Mr. Bajaj, what becomes relevant is even though Singapore recognizes the concept of PE. Even if you're doing strategic decisions or you're just doing important board meetings, it registers a PE even virtually, even if you're not physically present.
Right.
There is a counter in India called POEM, which is the place of effective management. So we have to weigh all these laws in place before as an entrepreneur we make that quick switch, because registering is easy, is quick. And the savings are also apparent. So we have to make sure that we look at all these perspectives, and I think it looks like win-win-win. But one just needs to look at these perspectives on how India views money coming back, because that will happen. It shouldn't be seen as a round tripping, and of course POEM. Yeah,
it is. It is not round tripping if there's this contractor vendor relationship. That is the reason why we do separate entities, Rajiv. right? If you are going to combine these two entities and one is going to hold 100% of the other, then of course the talk will come, whether you're round tripping, whether you are putting it in the other place and all this kind of thing, right? However, in this case, sometimes the ownership structure is different between these two countries. The activity is different. You're in India is software development. In Singapore, it's a management consultant. The activity is completely different, right? So I don't know about round tripping and everything. These kinds of things are so different from one another. Now you're talking about effective place of management in India and Singapore as well. You will effectively manage your software development company in India, and then you will also at the same time effectively manage your holding company in Singapore. That is a totally different activity, Rajiv. Right.
Okay. Yeah. So that's what Aditya mean, that if it is 100% subsidiary of or a holding company in Singapore, then of course all these angles will come in. Yep. All right. Very, very interesting, Juan. I think this is something which is definitely going to open a lot of opportunity. And as you specialize in advising companies on business in Singapore, I think it's a huge, huge opportunity for all of us to look at it from that perspective. Any other question from anyone? Ajish, you have any question?
No, actually, what my understanding is, like when we have more tax incentives, that's what I understood.
Yeah, tax incentive is one part. Efficiency of transfer of money is another very good, very important aspect. Yeah.
And the currency conversion, it happens on the rate, is it?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
If you are keeping the money in Singapore, you can keep multi-currencies, but when you bring that into India, you have to convert at the, whatever is the conversion rate at that time. Juan, any last? I know you have a flight to catch, so let's conclude our discussion today. How definitely this is going to change the scenario between business.
I think it's huge, Rajiv. I think a lot of and they should consider creating new offices, new holdings, new products, or even add on to their current product. Or wherever it is, there's a slight change to what they're doing back home in India, they should consider Singapore now. Whether it is a new market, even as simple as a new market, now they are going to get. They should all consider this kind of opportunities.
All right. So thank you very much, Huan, for very interesting sharing of the knowledge, and we really appreciate. And I'm sure since both the governments are now involved in promoting this trade between India and Singapore, and there's definitely Singapore is much more tax efficient as compared to our Indian tax structure. But yes, we need to be mindful of the legality of the things so that it is perfectly managed. So thanks for sparing time and sharing your knowledge with all of us. And we will definitely be in touch and keep observing how things are unfolding between these two countries. Thanks a lot.
No worries. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you
thanks
very much.
everyone. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining in. Bye-bye.